The General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is a European Union (EU) regulation that aims to protect the privacy and personal data of individuals within the EU. While GDPR primarily focuses on data protection in the context of traditional financial transactions and online activities, its impact on Bitcoin transactions is indirect but still relevant. Here are some ways in which GDPR may affect Bitcoin transactions. 1. Data protection for personal information. GDPR requires organizations to ensure the protection of personal data, including any information that could directly or indirectly identify an individual. When individuals engage in Bitcoin transactions through platforms or exchanges that collect personal information, such as names, addresses, or email addresses, those platforms must comply with GDPR requirements regarding the processing, storage, and security of that data. 2. Consent and transparency. GDPR mandates that organizations obtain clear and explicit consent from individuals before collecting and processing their personal data. In the context of Bitcoin transactions, platforms or exchanges must inform users about the collection and processing of their personal information for account creation, transaction verification, or compliance purposes. Users must have the option to provide or withdraw their consent freely, and platforms must be transparent about how they use and protect user data. 3. Data minimization and purpose limitation. GDPR requires organizations to collect and process only the personal data that is necessary for specific purposes and to limit the use of that data to those purposes. In the context of Bitcoin transactions, platforms or exchanges should minimize the collection and retention of unnecessary personal information and ensure that any data collected is used solely for transaction processing, account management, or regulatory compliance purposes. 4. Security and data breach notification. GDPR mandates that organizations implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect personal data from unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, or destruction. In the event of a data breach involving personal data, organizations must notify the relevant supervisory authority and affected individuals without undue delay. Platforms or exchanges facilitating Bitcoin transactions must implement robust security measures to safeguard user data and comply with GDPR requirements for data breach notification. 5. Cross-border data transfers. GDPR imposes restrictions on the transfer of personal data outside the EU to countries that do not provide an adequate level of data protection. When individuals engage in Bitcoin transactions with platforms or exchanges located outside the EU, their personal data may be subject to GDPR requirements if it is transferred to or accessed from EU jurisdictions. Platforms must ensure compliance with GDPR standards for cross-border data transfers to avoid potential penalties or legal consequences. Overall, while GDPR primarily focuses on data protection in traditional financial transactions and online activities, its principles of privacy, consent, transparency, and security have implications for Bitcoin transactions involving the collection, processing, and protection of personal data. Platforms or exchanges facilitating Bitcoin transactions should adhere to GDPR requirements to protect user privacy and comply with EU data protection laws.